So Jeddy, one of the founders of the Rising Man movement, what first called you to men's work?
I needed it myself. If I really go all the way back, I've been I've been an athlete. I've been playing sports my whole life, so I've always been in environments where men were competing and doing our best to elevate ourselves. When I got to college, I was always involved in men's organizations, and that was where the supportive aspect started to come into play. But it was really in my early and mid 20s where I recognized there was a void in my life. Even though I grew up with a wonderful father and a lot of really good men around me, there was still an absence of a certain quality of man that I was looking for to help me round out the type of man that I wanted to be. Just that example of mentorship and what it could look like to be a man. And so I got involved because it's what I was looking for myself. And when I was 25 years old, I recognized that it was missing and that I couldn't find it where I lived at the time in New York City. So I went searching. I went searching for mentorship. I went searching for a place to lay roots to have a family someday. Because of all the things that I thought I might want to have in my life, family was an absolute. And that was when I encountered this style of men's work all the way back almost 15 years ago now. So that's really where it all began. I needed it for myself in the ways that I was lost, the ways that I wasn't complete and ready for the responsibilities of adulthood, of manhood. And then practicing it and going deeper into that myself, I realized there were so many other men just like me who needed it too.
What was your first men's group when you started searching for it?
Well, the very first time I ever sat down in a circle of men, just men, where we realized, hey, there's something special here, was way back in college. And it was my senior year. It was good friends of mine. We were really interested in talking about things other than what we were studying in class, because there was a whole experience socially that we were having outside of that. So we started this thing called the group, and we just invited all types of people, men, women, students, people from the community. There were some times we had meetings of 30 or 40 people, just a big circle, having tea and sharing thoughts. It was really something special and unique. And from that, a few of my friends, one night we were sitting down reflecting on what we had been doing as a big group, and we said, hey, what's going on here? Like, what's actually going on? I remember one of my friends said, so what's going on, guys? And we like, what are you talking about? We've been hanging out here talking for hours. Like, no, what's really going on? And that was when we recognized there was a conversation that only we as men could have together. But we still didn't really quite know what we were doing. So that was the very, very first experience I ever had where I recognized there's a unique conversation that men can have once we gather with that intention and purpose. Now, fast forward about 4 more years, back to that time I mentioned when I was 25 years old. I was in Ventura County, California, and an elder friend of mine whom I'd met at Burning Man, he said, hey, why don't you come check out this thing called Men's Team? I think it'd be good for you. And I said, okay, sure. And I tell this story quite often because it was really the one that showed me there was something completely different that I had never experienced before. Because within 10 minutes of sitting down, I looked around and there was men who were all mostly twice my age. I was 25. So these were all men either in their 40s, 50s, maybe one of them in their 60s. And as soon as we got started, within 10 minutes, there was an experience I had where I saw one man on the hot seat who was being challenged so intensely by the other men that in my body, I felt like there was actually going to be a physical conflict. I felt like there was going to be a physical altercation. And here I was like, how do I get out of here if something goes down? And what was amazing was within a few moments, maybe 5 minutes from when I felt that way, all the men who were having that experience, two of them especially, were embracing and they were in tears. And I was like, what the hell just happened? And I'll never forget on the ride home with my friend who brought me to that meeting, he looked over at me and he said, so what'd you think? And I was like, what the hell was that? What actually just happened there? And he said, that's what it looks like when men express love in a way that only men can. It's a level of care, a degree of care that only men can express to each other in a certain type of space with certain agreements and a certain way of being. And so that was my first experience. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm hooked. That's because something powerful just opened up. And regardless of the context of that conversation that those men were having, I could tell that there was just the unpacking of things that men carry that can only happen in certain contexts and containers. And so that got me hook, line, and sinker. I didn't just bite the hook. I swallowed it and digested it. I was all the way in from that point.
Wow. Yeah, no, that indeed like creates a really deep impression. And there are certain practices and certain, yeah, ways of being that happen in a men's group that will definitely hook you in and be like, okay, I've never experienced something like this. But how do you create that safe space? Because like you felt that they were gonna fight, and usually outside of spaces like this, it will like people will get into fights because of things like this, because of being challenged as a man. So what's the structure that allows men's group to be safe?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll clarify one thing in the context of that circle that I was in there, and the framework of what we do in Rising Man. We call these circles teams, and we make
Mm,
that distinction between groups and teams because we really rely on that deeper sense of confidence in each other, that deep confidentiality and trust that we have in other men. That's different. A lot of times, my experience of groups is that people come and go as they please. There's no real sense of commitment or loyalty or devotion to the other men. So
mm,
in the context of a team, in the framework of a team, you know that implicitly there's nobody here who's going to do harm, right? In these spaces, we believe that we can trust each other with our deepest pains because we know that they're not going to be used against us. And that's what really creates that deep level of trust. Now, on the surface, we have agreements like confidentiality. Absolutely nothing leaves the container. And that's black or white. There's no gray about it, right? Nothing is spoken outside of that space. Now, in order to have agreements like that, it requires a deep level of faith and trust. It requires a willingness to take risk. And so the way that we develop that kind of trust is by putting faith in each other and taking those risks. But when those risks are reinforced with proof and evidence that men can be trusted, the safety of that container multiplies. It multiplies exponentially to the point where inside of these containers, there's things that are often shared that men have never shared anywhere else in their lives before. Now, a lot of people might think that that can take a long time to nurture and create. And it's true, it gets stronger over time. However, we recognize even new men who come to our teams for the first time, they recognize that when we speak about confidentiality, when we talk about the expectations of what it means to arrive in this space, to not bring judgment into the space, to bring curiosity, that it makes it so supremely safe that men can drop in even if it's their first time, because we're often walking around in the world waiting for a place to unload all of these burdens. We're waiting for the moment and the people and the circumstances to unburden ourselves of these things that we carry. And then when you start to see other people sharing the same or similar things, immediately you recognize, even if you've only been there for the first time, that I'm safe here. It's okay. It's kind of like I'll show you mine if you show me yours thing.
mm.
It's like, here's mine. Here's my open heart. Here's all of my deepest insecurities and wounds. And then show and tell. What do you have? It kind of creates that level of solidarity, and pretty quickly too.
How was your first experience of you opening the armor after you first saw other people doing it?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question, man. I feel like that's something that I've practiced over and over again over time. I have a pretty good memory. Can't say I have a crisp memory of the very first moment that I did that. In fact, going back to that original men's team experience, because the story I shared in the beginning of my first time being there as a guest, those same guys that I still meet with today, 14 years later, every Tuesday for 3 hours, same guys. They like to joke even today that for the first year they didn't know what my voice sounded like. And there's some truth to that. I mean, listen, I was a 25-year-old man. I was just really trying to find my way in the world. So I was a sponge. I was soaking it up, and I often felt like I was 30 seconds behind what they were doing because they were so practiced in what was going on there. But there is one memory that stands out, and I don't know if this is the very first time I opened up, but somewhere within that first year, I don't know exactly how long, we were having a meeting again, same guys, same team, and we were meeting on one of the men's boats, not a big boat, like a tiny little boat where 8 men, shoulder to shoulder, sitting around in a circle. And I remember I just had a moment where there was an opportunity to speak, and I told them, I said, "Hey guys, I got to be honest with you. I feel like I'm just the young tiger here trying to earn my stripes." And essentially what I was saying is I don't know how to use my voice in this circle. I don't know what value I bring here because in my experience, I was just taking everything that I was learning from these men. These are guys who have been through divorce, guys who were had raised children already. I was about to become a father at that time, and all of these guys had sons that were almost my age, maybe just a little bit younger. And I remember sharing this with them very openly and very candidly. And that experience of I don't know what's going to come back. I don't know if I'm going to, even that feeling, even though I'd been with those guys for so long, still those feelings and insecurities of what if there's judgment? What if they tease me about that? What if they make fun of that? And incredibly, it was met with just so much understanding and compassion. And one of the men said something to me that I've heard many times over the years, that young blood makes old blood boil. He said, you have a role here. He said, we're all inspired by you as a 25, 26-year-old man, because many of those guys hadn't started sitting on a men's team until they were already into their 40s, some of them even later. And they admired me. They said, we admire you for being here and doing this now. And hopefully you can learn from us and prevent the same hardships and breakdowns we created in our families because we didn't have this. So that was the first time I can remember that really stands out, that I opened up my heart and got really honest. And I remember the feeling. I remember my heart was pounding, all the signs of feeling anxious and a little bit nervous about what might happen. But I remember it was a really pivotal moment for me.
And probably by you hearing their admiration, I think that's also what led you to then start building your own men's work. When did that shift happen from you being just absorbing everything to actually saying like, hey, I actually need to do this
Yeah.
myself?
Yeah, it's fun to reflect upon this because now we're talking about things that are over a decade ago. I remember when it was easy to speak about it, when it was just yesterday, but it really does feel like quite a long time ago. The way I remember it is probably a year or two of just being on the team and just really applying myself to the practices and the principles of being on a team. There was just so much value in that because so much of it was about giving your word and keeping it. And if you can't keep your word, how to repair if you break your word, just over and over and over, repeating that, practicing it on the team, practicing it in my relationship, everywhere I went. And I think what began to happen is after a couple of years of doing this in a concerted way, I started to change naturally. And it started to spill over into my life, which is the whole point. And when it started to spill over into my life, my friends, primarily my male friends, my closest male friends, most of whom I'd known for over a decade already, started to look and say, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, what are you up to?" There's a curiosity about what I was involved with because at this time also, I was living in California, and the heart of my community, my closest friends, were all still back in New York City. So
Mm.
many of them were hearing and they were like coming out and visiting, and we were seeing each other and like, wow, what are you up to? What's going on? And how are you making they were noticing that I was changing. They were noticing that I was maturing and growing, and there was an interest. And I think that's when it started to get my attention that, okay, I'm not the only guy who needs this. There's a lot of other men, including the men who are closest to me, who need this. And then I would start encountering men who weren't just my age, but even older than I was, and saying, hey, how did you how are you doing what you do? Because I was starting a family. I had a wonderful relationship with my wife. I was starting to do the things that I think lots of men want to be able to do but don't know how. And that's when I started to get the insight, okay, there's something here. And this is also where my journey into rites of passage came into play. And I know you want to go there too, but that was another key factor, was when I fasted in 2014, when I first went out on the mountain. It became really clear to me in my experience out there that this was something I needed to bring and give back to other men. So yeah, I'll pause there because I know there's a lot you want to dig into about that.
Mm. No, I love it. And something that I start to say, even to the men in the circle that I'm in, the team that I am, is every man needs a men's group, but not everyone knows they need it.
Mm-hmm.
And until you actually are inside of that and you're actually feeling safe and all of these things start to happen, you start to wonder how was I living my life without this? Something that I can truly say from my experience is that I never felt part of a team because I was never like good in sports. until I was in Rising Man. Like I've actually found my friendship group of people that I can butt heads with from Rising Men. And there are many men who might not be in the sports teams or in the sports space that need this. So that's why I think it's really important. But let's talk about the rites of passage. So let's go super practical. Can How can a man do that? Like, how can a man go from, hey, I'm living my life normally, now I'm fasting in the middle of nature? How does that happen?
Yeah, this is great. I think what I'll do is just give a little bit of a layman's understanding of what we mean when we say rites of passage. Really, what we're talking about is having a very intentional and deliberate way of marking the end of one chapter of life and the beginning of another one.
Mm.
So there's lots of different types of rites of passages. Graduating from high school, college, having your first child, getting married. These are all examples that many people experience all the time of going from one identity to another. And that's what we're really utilizing is we're utilizing the transfer of or the transition from one identity into another and marking that moment with a lot of intention and purpose. So for example, at a college graduation, there's a commencement ceremony where you have a diploma and you walk the stage and you shake hands and then you take the little tassel on your cap and you move it from one side to the other. And that indicates that you went from being a college student to a college graduate. So there's an identity that goes along with being a student. And there's a whole chapter and season of what being a college student is like. And then when you go to be a graduate, it's beginning a whole new journey. So when we talk about rites of passages, we're really just talking about bringing a lot of care, attention, and purpose to these transitional moments in our lives. Because sometimes these moments happen and they come and they go without enough recognition of what it took, of what was required. Sometimes it's the community isn't there to witness a person going through that transition. Sometimes the person going through that transition doesn't have enough awareness around what it is that they're letting go of and what it is that they're calling in for themselves. And so the way we do rites of passage, we're just bringing a lot more ceremony and purpose into that moment because that's what really gives it its strength. So how does any ordinary person start to think about the idea of going into the wilderness for 4 days without food, right? And I would say just thinking of it as creating the circumstances for yourself to put a high level of importance and purpose and intention behind a life transition. And it can be for any number of things. You know, traditionally, a lot of rites of passage ceremonies and rituals were done to help young people prepare for the responsibilities of adulthood, whether it was boys or girls. But a lot of times we think of the rites of passage that boys had to go through so that they could be hunters, warriors, providers, protectors of the whole village. And there's many different examples across virtually every type of human, wherever your ancestry comes from, of taking boys and putting them through an experience to see if they were ready. So these are also opportunities to test one's readiness and preparedness for the responsibilities of what's coming. Now, it's not for everybody. The idea of going out into the wilderness for 4 days without food, it doesn't have to be that is the only way for somebody to mark those transitions. But what I think is really valuable about the way we do it is that it creates a very unique combination of circumstances. Being alone in the wilderness, no distractions, no technology, no social human interaction for 4 days and 4 nights, no food, some of these other things that we rely on to give us interruption in our day, all of those things are gone. So many people, most people have never had these conditions to sit for that length of time, free of distractions, to just tune into oneself. So forget about what it appears like when you close your eyes and you imagine that, if it's something that's so different and unique than anything you've experienced before. Just imagine having the conditions for clarity, to step away from all the noise for a moment, to really hear yourself, and then to hear what's reflected back to you in the majesty of nature. That's what we're talking about here. Now, I get that may still be something very foreign and unusual to somebody who's not familiar with these ways of being, but that's usually how I start the conversation with somebody who has never heard about this before.
Yeah. And what you said, right? It's clarity. Why do you think people find it so strange to get out of the whole system? Or another way of saying it, yeah, please.
Because I think that most people haven't experienced something like that before, or don't know anyone else who has. Even for you, right? To my understanding, when you first encountered Rising Man, I don't think you knew anybody who had done a vision fast before. Is that correct?
Well, my mother actually did it with the
Oh,
Red
okay.
Road. Yeah, she did
Okay.
it, and she did it a little bit more extreme. She did it with without water as well.
Right. Okay. So that's one of the unique cases, but other
Hmm.
men who've come into our community, maybe they've never heard of that and they've never met anyone who's done it before. But once you start to meet men inside of the Rising Man community who have done that and you start to get to know them, you see the impact that it had on them. And it demystifies the idea of what it means to go out there and do something like that. And then when you actually start to imagine the experience, right? Because there's the initial imagination of like, whoa, this sounds so unusual. But I'm sure everybody who's listening to this has gone on a beautiful walk in nature before, and hopefully has had that experience where you feel, even if it's just for a moment, like you're alone out there. And maybe you sit down and you just listen to the bird song. It does something to your nervous system, right? It creates a sense of peace and tranquility. I think so many people, myself included, we're just accustomed to having so much stimulus in our lives, so much to distract us, so many things to do, right? A lot of times I meet guys and they're not afraid of bears, they're not afraid of not eating, they're afraid of not knowing what am I going to do for 4 days, you know, and that's real. That's kind of the circumstances that we're in. So I think in a lot of cases, what what people are have resistance to about this process is the unfamiliar. And then when you
Hmm.
get underneath the unfamiliar, it's really the uncomfortable. In life, too many people are trying to learn to live more comfortably instead of how to embrace discomfort. So whether it's going out into the woods for 4 days with no food or some other way of pushing our levels of discomfort and our ability to be with discomfort, I think that's absolutely essential to any human's development. And more of us need that, and especially men right now.
Yeah, I love that part that you say we need to aim to be uncomfortable because life itself gets uncomfortable if you don't put attention to it. It will go to chaos, it will go to entropy.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the fasting part or the rites of passage, I think it's also important to notice, okay, you do that event, but how does that change overall in your life? Because it's just going to be one event. It's similar to marriage, right? You have your wedding ceremony, but what else? What happens next?
Yeah, well, that's the thing about marriage is the wedding's the fun part, right? The wedding is the part where you get to celebrate. It's the moment, right? The peak experience of going from being a single bachelor to now having a partner. So there's so much excitement and so much circumstance around that. Your friends and loved ones come from all over in way maybe I think I heard somewhere there's two times in your life where you get the opportunity to gather that many people you love is when you get married and when you die, and getting married is the only one that you get to be there for. Right? So it's a great example that you raised is we have this opportunity to really experience the peak of celebration and recognition and commitment and promise in marriage in the same way that we do with these rites of passage ceremonies, but the real work begins the next day. In fact, the real work begins after the honeymoon because the honeymoon's kind of like the glow after the experience, similar to rites of passage. But we call this process after the fast incorporation. And you know just as well as any man who's gone through this process with us, we always say over and over again, this is the hard part. This is where it really matters. The wedding was fun, but marriage is everything that comes after. The fast was incredible. It was provocative. It was insightful. It was illuminating. But the real work is done in incorporation. It's walking those steps. There was a Lakota elder named Black Elk who says, I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says that a man cannot access the full power of his vision until he's demonstrated it for the people to see. You can't just have a dream. You can't just have an idea of the person you want to be and how you want to impact your community. You have to live it and be it. So, as much as we put emphasis on the fast and the ceremony of death and rebirth and becoming a new person and claiming the man that you want to be, we know that it doesn't happen in that moment. It's everything that happens afterwards, which I'm sure we'll talk about this too. We put so much emphasis on having incorporation community. Because what if you got married and everybody who showed up for you at your wedding celebrated you, gave you gifts, raised you up on the chairs and danced with you all night long, but then they weren't in your life anymore? How well do you think your marriage would go if those people who were there to witness you in your promise weren't there to also support you in your commitment?
Hmm. Yeah. And I think relationships cannot be a two-person job, and also your life, like no man is an island, as you say. So that's pushes back to the teams of being witnessed again and again and again. Could you give me practical examples of how does this reflect in your life? Because you, as you said before, right, you were doing these practices, you were living this new identity in a way, but how did that appear on your daily life?
So what I think you're asking me about is my own incorporation,
Mm-hmm.
right? After my own experience. Well, we're talking about my incorporation when anytime we mention Rising Man. Because when I went out and fasted in 2014, part of the vision that I received was to carry and deliver this work that I was doing for myself, for other men, men of all ages, young men, older men, just men in general. It was so clear to me that that was part of my purpose. So even just the existence of Rising Man for the better part of the last decade and the evolution that it's gone through and all of the work and energy and time that I've put into it, that so many other men have now put into it, it's all a reflection of where my incorporation journey started, you know? And so that's probably the simplest and best way I can invite someone to look at, well, how has that been for you, Jeddy? What has it been for you since your fast? It's required determination and consistent action, right? You don't just, this doesn't just happen because I saw it when I was on the mountain fasting for 4 days. No, it's just diligent time, effort, and energy, learning to enroll a lot of support. The reason that Rising Man got to where it is now is because I had the support of so many people who believed in what I saw, and so many other people's visions who overlapped and collided with my own. That's the beautiful aspect, is that I might drift away for just a second here, but I think it's important that we talk about this piece. I love Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and for anyone who's listening that isn't familiar with that, just go Google Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It'll look like a little pyramid, and when you look at it, there's 4, sometimes 5 different levels, distinct levels of the essential needs that every human has in order for us to identify our unique purpose in life. That's my interpretation of Maslow's work. He says that we need food, water, and shelter to start, right? We can't do anything unless those needs are met. And we see so many people in the world who are struggling just to create those needs. But when those needs are met, then we can start to talk about financial security and even beyond that, self-esteem, right? Validation from the community, from the people around us, love, intimacy. These are all needs and requirements that Maslow said humans need in order to have their full expression of who they are. He called it self-actualization. I think of it as purpose. I think of it as a person's unique purpose. And there's a recent article that I read that took Maslow's hierarchy and challenged it and said that's actually just the beginning. That progression up the steps of the pyramid is actually what we're supposed to do with our young people. We're supposed to give them those needs until they can learn to provide those things for themselves to help them actualize. And that's where this intersects with the rites of passage ceremonies, the coming of age ceremonies, where if the village succeeded, then it allowed these young boys and girls to reach that self-actualization point. And then with a ceremony of a rite of passage, they could decide to move from childhood to adulthood, from boyhood to manhood, girlhood to womanhood, and accept the responsibilities of that next chapter. And then with all of these boys and girls becoming men and women of the village, now we had a whole generation of actualized people connected to their unique purpose. It's like the X-Men, right? Graduating to their full strength and power. Now we have a whole team of people who are fully activated. Now what can we do? And then we pass that on to the next generation, and it's one generation after the other who are fully actualized. That's the way that we're meant to be as people all across the world. And so I share this here now because that thing I mentioned a moment ago about my vision intersecting with other people's visions and deciding to keep walking that path, that's what allows us to create greater and greater goodness in and around ourselves. That's what allows us to make change. That's what also allows us to endure the journey of incorporating a gift, of living my life purpose. Is nobody does that alone. You just don't. You just our biology proves that we're not designed to live our life purpose alone. We're social creatures. So that's all we're really talking about here is we're talking about the ways in which humans are designed biologically, evolutionarily to collaborate on life together. So I drifted for a second because I think that's really important to, it really roots the whole nature of this conversation and everything that I'm about, Rising Man's about, but it's bigger than me. It's bigger than Rising Man even. It's what we're supposed to be doing as humans.
And it challenges the notion of there's only a place at the top for only a few people. Yeah. Collaboration is actually the true way of winning in life, because the game we're actually playing is not the game of who succeeds in life, is how can we continue living. That is the infinite game that we're playing as humans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that could take us in a whole different direction, because when you start talking about elitism, you start talking about the 1% of people who have 99% of the world's resources at their command. There's a tremendous imbalance. That's not the indigenous way. That's not the original instructions in the human DNA, is to live like that. It's something that emerged. Now we're talking about colonialism, right? Now we're talking about colonization. Now we're talking about principles of supremacy that it really honestly go way beyond my understanding, and something that we've all become a part of. But in the timeline of human history, right? The timeline that humans have been around here for, there's like a hair of a section on that timeline that represents what we're experiencing presently, right? This hierarchy of systems and supremacy of the elites and everybody else, right? The vast majority of that human timeline was small cohorts, clans, villages of people collaborating and working together. And sure, there was elements of leadership and hierarchy, right? Like people who led and other people who supported, but it was all the people sharing their resources together. This idea of stockpiling and hoarding resources for a small number of people, that's a very recent concept in human history, and one that it also doesn't match with our DNA. That's why so many people, that's why we have empathy, right? If we really want to think about what empathy is, if you have access to your empathy, I think most people who are in that 1% elitists, they figured out a way to turn that part of themselves off or ignore it. But I still think it's in there because we all have it. It's part of our evolutionary construct. My ability to care about you, Astro, to be sensitive to your life experience, and if you're going through something hard, I can relate to you. That's what allows us to want to share with each other, right? Someone going through a hardship, people donate money, donate resources, donate time because we care. Because like you said, what's the whole goal? You said the whole goal of this thing is to pass it on, to keep living, right? It's to keep living. It's not to have 150-foot yachts and splendor in our lives that just makes life more comfortable and temporarily enjoyable, you know?
But to the people that talk about the production and talk about getting things done, right? What would you say to the people that say, if I work together with someone, no one's going to get along, or everyone's going to ask for different directions? But on your example, how have you been able to enroll people into something that's more than almost 10 years now? What have you seen that's different working, like you being the hierarchy versus you building people up?
Yeah, that's a great question. My first inclination is to say you have to identify something that everyone cares about more than just themselves, which is a
Mm.
tricky thing to do, you know? And I think about it as the difference between childhood and adulthood. I remember the day my son was born, and I felt a cellular shift in my body. It was the first time in my life. My son was born. I had just turned 20. Was that 27? 28. I had just turned 28 years old when my son was born. And I remember holding him for the first time, seeing him for the first time, and really feeling like, wow, it's not about me anymore. And I thought I would have that moment when I married my wife, because obviously we were choosing to walk through life together. But it was such a different feeling when my first child was born, because then I recognized he's really dependent on me right now. If I leave the room, I don't know if he'll be okay. If I leave the room, yeah, my wife will be okay. She'll be okay for a few minutes, and then we're gonna do life together. We'll be fine. But that feeling of like, no, he really depends on me. He's really counting on me. That to me was when I really crossed that threshold into adulthood. Because for me, an adult is somebody who lives to serve beyond themselves, and they do that in their every action. And so, back to your question, you have to find a community of adults who have really embraced that definition of adulthood, who recognize, man, I'm going to die someday, and all this other stuff that some people value, that's not really going to matter to me when I'm dead and gone. The only thing that it really matters is what I leave behind, and how I influence and impact the people that are going to be here when I go. When I think about Rising Man, I'm talking about culture. I'm thinking about the legacy of culture, returning to a way of being that's more collaborative and less selfish and isolating. And again, I think it's something we all have in our DNA. It just needs to be reawakened. That idea, one of my favorite things is we do this thing called the Rising Man Weekend. It's kind of our intro to being a rising man and doing things this way. And it's amazing when you see guys start to crack open who've never experienced this before. And we do it over the course of 2.5 days. It's basically a little long weekend. And one of the components we bring into that weekend is wherever we're holding this event, because it's a fully outdoor event. Guys camp out in tents and everything. Wherever we're hosting the event, we do at least 2 to 3 hours of service work to the land that we're allowed to hold this event on. And of all the things that we do, it's a wonderful experience. There's fun, there's challenge, there's all of it. The men always love that part the most, because that's the time where we really make it about what we're doing and not ourselves. For those 2 to 3 hours, it's about how can we give back to this land, to the hosts that allowed us to be here. How can we help them? So we chop wood. Sometimes some properties we go to, we chop wood and we stockpile wood that's going to help the host keep their house warm for the winter. Right? Sometimes we've done demolition on structures that would have taken somebody 3 or 4 days to do by themselves. We do it in 45 minutes because we have a lot of hands and it makes light work. And you see the feelings of satisfaction and joy, the smiles on men's faces, just because we love doing that stuff together. But we forget that we can collaborate on things like that. And there's so many men like myself who experience the hardship of feeling isolated in our individual pursuits. And that's real. Many of us, we don't live close to each other in community the way that villages were arranged so many years ago. But when we come together, it gets reactivated so easily. All you got to do is throw a man a shovel and another one a pickaxe and say, go do this. And then let time pass for a couple of hours. And we remember that that's what we're here to do. So sometimes you just need to create the circumstances and the invitation for people to work together like that, and to recognize, you know what? Let me share one more quick story, because I think this is a really, really good. This one sticks out. So one of my great brothers in life, Phil Gomez, when we were in college together, he did this. I forget what class he was taking, but over the summertime they took a trip down to the Dominican Republic, and I believe they went over to Haiti, and they were seeing how the farmers down there. I forget the term for this practice they had, but let's say that in an area there were 10 families that had 10 farms. Instead of each of those 10 families working on their own farm every day, what they would do is they would rotate. So all of the families would go to one farm, one of the 10 farms, one day, And all of those people together would get 2 weeks of work done in one day. And they would make lunch and they would eat together. They would sing songs together. And then the next day they would go and work on the next person's farm. And when they did it this way, instead of spreading all the work out over 10 days, they worked together all of those 10 days and all of the work got done, but to an even higher level of efficiency. And not only that, they got to do it together. And so they were building relationships, they were building trust, right? They were caring about each other in a way that you don't when, you just wave at your neighbor once a day when you see him before you get in your car. And that always sticks out in my mind. I wasn't even there. I just heard this story secondhand, but it really sticks to me because to me, that's the essence of humanity at its finest, is when we're just working towards something together. And it's not about any one person or a few people. It's about the collective, you know?
But let's talk about sustainability, right? Because I've even heard in theory this can even work when with money, right? We all put money into a pool and then we give one person, then we all pull again and we put the other person. But those things tend to fall off because there's a lack of integrity or there's something gets corrupted. This has been going for the past 10 years. So what have you done to prevent it from getting corrupted?
In Rising Man
Yeah.
specifically? Yeah, well, I think the best way to describe that is some of the recent events, for when Rising Man started, I just wanted to have a conversation with men about how it can look to be a man in the world. I wasn't satisfied with the conversation that most people were having. This is back in 2017, and I had no experience in this work. I just listened to a lot of podcasts, and I thought to myself, I would love to share my version of what it means to be a man and hear from other people of what it can look like to be a man that might inspire many other men. So we started Rising Man as a podcast back in 2018 was when we launched our first episodes. And from there, it took on a life of its own. There were so many men. I think you were one of the early ones who got involved, and you heard about Rising Man, you listened to the podcast, and community developed because it was speaking to something in so many other people. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time. So when we started to have a community and we started to offer events and programs for people, we needed to have some sort of business structure. And so we set it up as a for-profit business. And even though Rising Man has never operated in the way people think of as a for-profit, I mean, I myself, I've never taken a salary for anything I've done in Rising Man. In fact, I've invested well over 6 figures of my own time, money, and energy into it. So it was never really a traditional for-profit, but that's been our background corporate structure for all these years. And it became apparent over the last couple of years that we've really operated as a nonprofit. And I don't know how much people know or don't know about corporate entities, but a nonprofit doesn't belong to anybody. It actually belongs to the public. And there's a board of directors who are responsible to steward the mission and vision. And then there's an executive director who's the one who steers the ship and is beholden to the board of directors. And so we made this decision about a year ago that we were going to move under the umbrella of a nonprofit structure. And I think a lot of people who didn't even know about Rising Man, that's kind of a subtle transition. But for us, it was really significant because in that moment, it demonstrated that this isn't here to benefit any one person. This is really a legacy gift to the people, the men who are involved in Rising Man and the ones who will be impacted by it as ripples. And I think that's the best answer I have to your question around how do you, because there is that assumption. There's the assumption that, and I understand it because that's the world we live in. The assumption that there's someone or some people who are benefiting from me. I mean, I walk around with that belief, and anybody who's ever picked up a phone and heard a telemarketer, you just have this feeling like someone's asking for something from you on the other side. And I don't think that that's inherently bad. I don't think it's inherently wrong or bad for us to ask each other for things, but the right things, right? Making requests and fulfilling on requests and restoring that natural exchange of energy and gifts to each other. With Rising Man, we said, hey, here's one more way we can remind people that it can look like this, that everybody, because the idea is that by participating in Rising Man, men are becoming the best leaders that they can possibly be in their lives. And we start from integrity. This is an integrity and honor-based culture that we have here. And so we know that when men start to live their lives that way, everyone's going to benefit from that. Everyone's going to benefit from that. And that's something that everyone in and around Rising Man can really buy into, because we start to see the reciprocity, right? We start to see, oh, when I give my time, energy, and resources to this, it comes back around and it benefits not just me, but everyone around me that I care about too. So I, I think we're not just Rising Man, but in general, as a society, we're trying to remediate this belief we've all adopted that someone's out there to take something from me. I think we all wake up with a sense of that. So we're protected. We're on guard. I question everything because I wonder what's somebody's intentions for asking me for something, you know? And I my intention is that Rising Man is helping to restore a sense of trust and faith in humanity that comes from seeing men live honorably.
Yeah. And I think in that aspect, I think that's the transformation, and that's the thing that prevents corruption itself, right? Because as soon as someone's slipping, they will get called out. They will be called forward into integrity and say, "Hey, you're better than this because you set the standard for your own self." So it's I would even say it's literally like blockchain. Like it self-regulates and it fixes itself. Like it's created a container about fixing itself.
That's
Yeah.
what we'll do. We're gonna call Rising Man the human blockchain experiment.
I love it. Awesome, man. Well, let's go now into you looking back at it, right? Because did you ever think it was gonna grow this way?
No, no, definitely not. Well, let me think about that for a second before I answer quickly. I never thought when I first had the stroke of inspiration for Rising Man, I remember I was sitting in a coffee shop and I was trying to think of what to call the podcast. And there was all these, I went through so many different names, but I remember when the Rising Man podcast, and I said it out loud. I said the Rising Man. I said it a bunch of times, the Rising Man. Immediately I was flooded with visuals in my mind. I'm a very visual person. So I just saw all of what Rising Man could be, but it was just these tiny glimpses. This is in like the fall of 2017. Little Jeddy sitting in a coffee shop, just thinking about this. And I saw men sitting around a fire. I saw men going out into the wilderness together. I saw men embrace. I just had flashes of what that could become, but that's all I saw at the time. I didn't see an international men's movement. I didn't see a nonprofit organization. I didn't see the things that I can't even see right now because they haven't yet happened. So there was no way that I imagined it would become what it is right now or what it's going to be 5, 10, 20 years from now. But there was a strong sense of conviction. There was that sense of an intuitive sense that there was something very special and important here, similar to the feeling I had when I met my wife for the first time, and a couple of other moments in life where you're just like, there's something about that. But no, man, there's absolutely no way I could have imagined this, because at that time I had no experience doing any of this. I'd been involved in men's organizations for a long time. I had a lot of leadership training um, for myself, but I was working as a physical therapist. I had no background in speaking or podcasting or business. I didn't even know someone could start a business until I did. I thought I grew up around a bunch of, blue and white collar folks who just, punched in and punched out every day. So longish answer to your question, no, man, I had no idea, but I definitely felt in my guts that there was something powerful here. And I honestly believe today, as I say this to you, I still have no exact idea of how far Rising Man is meant to go and what it's meant to become, but I can tell you that inside of my guts, it feels like the most important thing I can do in my life.
Mm. And this last part, becoming this North Star, this purpose, how can another mind, how can another man find that, and how will it feel when he's finding it? Because I don't think you now know it, right? It's been evolving, but what would be like those inklings? How can they determine that it's inkling versus just weird idea that someone else told him?
That's a great question, man. In fact, you know what? Remind me to bring that to our next incorporation council, because I don't, I think I just, until you asked me that, I think I assumed that everybody experiences it the way that I did, because for me, I actually had a couple of visual moments in my life, not just when I was fasting, but during a Vipassana retreat. I closed my eyes and I saw men sitting around a fire. There's like a movie playing behind my eyelids. So I've had a couple of moments where it just was so clear to me in a way that other things in my life have not been clear. But I wonder how that is for other men. So I can only speak from my experience, really. And please remind me to ask other men that question, because I really am interested. What I can say from what I believe I know is that there's an internal knowing inside of all of us, and it's very tricky to get to the source of that, because it's usually layered with so many illusions and mirages and fears and doubts and insecurities that we need to really carve through and peel them away. So I think it occurs when we decide that that's important, um, not conceptually, but I think that's actually a biological thing that happens. I've seen a lot of men who go out adventuring in the world, having experiences, and then at some point that gets old, and they get tired of going out and looking for something, and they start to zero in on the thing that feels really important to them. And hopefully by that time, they've gotten a good sense of at least the direction that that star is in, and they can start looking at the sky, looking at the horizon, trying to aim their finger at it, and that becomes a stage of life. That's usually when we encounter a lot of the guys in Rising Man, is when guys are looking and they're saying, all right, I'm zeroing in on this, and they need a little more support and reflection and accountability to pursue that point. But what I've seen over the years, because I've worked with thousands of guys at this point, is when men really are ready to start locking in on whatever that North Star is, you start to see a change in them. The things that were difficult before, the things that they had their resistances and their vices and their challenges overwhelm them, they start to really lock in on the things that matter. They start to be able to choose their purpose over their comforts. And you see men start to hone in on it. So I don't know how everybody experiences that, but I do know that we need to release men of any of the shame or judgment that they have for themselves or that they feel from other people, just being in pursuit of that. Because until you've really connected with it, that's your number one mission, is to identify what that thing is and what it looks like. And it can look very different from one person to the next. And that's fine. But then once you identify what it is, well, then it's simple. Then it becomes your mission to do everything in your power to make that vision come to reality, and to have to enroll and generate the support around you to make sure you're not doing it all by yourself. So
Now let's go a little bit pull back family. Let's go first your wife, Carrie.
uh-huh.
How does being with other men help you be better with your partner? How does that?
Well, I will say that one of the best signs of a really effective men's team is when your partner is reminding you that you have a team meeting and kicking you out the door to go to it, which wasn't always the case. Early on when I started going to my team meetings back in the day, and Carrie would admit this too. She had resistance to it. She especially when we started having a family, and she's like, "Why are you leaving? You've been working all day, and we only have so many evenings with you. Why do you have to leave and go be at your team meeting?" But she obviously recognized that going to those meetings for 3 hours every 2 weeks allowed me to show up as the best husband and father that I could. And I can unequivocally say that if I was not a part of a men's team, I wouldn't be the type of man, the type of father, the type of husband and leader that I am. And so being on a men's team has, because here's one of the misnomers, and I think this is for the women who are listening or the partners out there, is you wonder what goes on because there's such a high level of confidentiality around these meetings, right? And you come home, you say, "How was your meeting?" And you might hear from your partner, "It was good meeting." And it's natural to want to know more. Well, what did you talk about? And meeting that, confronting that wall of confidentiality. Well, I can't talk to you about what we talked about, but the men are doing great. Um, I know for Carrie, it really required her to lean into trusting that, and the men on my team they've helped us. When we were living back in California, they showed up and they helped us move every time we moved from one place to another. When my children were born, they were showing up and bringing us food, and then she just sees the way that I show up because I go to those meetings. And even though she doesn't know what happened, she sees and feels the result and the impact of that. There's been many times where Carrie and I have been in an argument or a disagreement about something, and I'm steadfast on my perspective. And then I go to a meeting and I come home and I come back to her. I say, you know what? I need to apologize. I was being hard headed. I was being stubborn. So I think over time she's gotten enough evidence to see that, okay, the guys at these meetings, we're not just showing up and commiserating about our partners. Oh, she's crazy. Oh, she's and reinforcing the beliefs that we may have about our partner. We're actually challenging those beliefs. And we don't talk about how crazy or unreasonable our partners are. We say, hey, where is there something in you that's not showing up enough for her? Where's there something in you? What are you missing? We put that onus on ourselves. And so I think if Carrie were here, she would say the same thing, that she sees and feels the impact of how I show up when I go to these meetings, even though she has no idea the content of what we're talking about. And she'll tell you to this day, she's like, nope, Jeddy's a vault, because I hold that agreement of confidentiality so high. And that's what allows, I mean, just the impact and the ripples of that, the trust that she knows, wow, he really holds that sacredly. It reinforces to her that she can count on me for so many other things too.
And now to fatherhood. There's you being a father in real life. There's also you being a father to the men in the circle, and there's also you being fathered by other men in the circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what to say to that? Yeah, I mean, I think just the definition of father, and the way that we hold fathering inside of Rising Man is that it's not about biological fathering, right? It's about mentorship. And sometimes fathering is calling someone forward and saying the difficult thing that they may not want to hear, that their ego wants to push back on and challenge. Sometimes fathering is providing that external validation that only another man can for another man in a healthy way. The ultimate goal is for us to be able to father ourselves as effectively as we can. Right? Can I tell myself what I need to hear in a moment of hardship, in a moment of doubt or fear? And if I don't, if I'm not capable of doing that, well, then hopefully I have my men there, you know. But the goal is that we become more and more capable to do that for ourselves. And to me, the archetype of a father is just a mentor. It's a guide. One of my favorite things I picked up over the years is that there's specific roles for a father when it comes to a son and a daughter. And when it comes to a son, the role of a father to a son is to prepare him for life.
Mm.
And it's such a wonderful concept to unpack. How do you prepare someone for life? How do you prepare a boy to be a man? There's so many ways. Sometimes it's very action oriented. It's very active. I need to show him. I need to show him life skills. I got to show him how to tie knots. I got to show him how to balance his accounts and take better care of his money. But as I've come to understand it, especially as a father to my own son and daughter, is that the majority of my fathering and my mentorship is done in silence. It's not done with my words. It's done with my actions. You know, my children, the way my children wake up every day, for the most part, is they see me coming home sweaty from the gym. Right. And they we don't talk about daddy going to the gym. I don't talk to them about the importance of exercise and working out very much. They see it, right? They
Mm-hmm.
see it in the footsteps that I walk. And there's also ways to father children ineffectively, right? Things that transparently I'm dealing with. I'm trying to get off of my phone more. I'm trying to get off of my screens more, right? Like we're all very attached to these things. And so I'm fathering them in ineffective ways at times too. If I'm on my screens too much, or if I'm distracted, or all the different ways that I can, because I'm a human too. So to me, fathering is really about listening and being mindful of what am I demonstrating? What am I showing to my family? And how am I supporting my son and my daughter for that next stage of their life. For a daughter, it's a little bit different. Um, they say that a father's role for his daughter is to be an example of the man that she's going to marry someday. And even if she chooses not to marry or not to marry a man, to be an example of what she should expect from men and the men that she
Mm.
surrounds herself with. And that makes that, to me, that just keeps it so clear every time, right? Every interaction I have with her is an example for me to show her, hey, look for a man like this. Look for a man that's patient with you. Look for a man that's kind. Look for a man that won't back down from you, but also won't be aggressive or hurtful with you, right? Look for a man that you can trust, who will be there for you when you're upset, who will apologize if he gets angry or if he gets upset with you. For a man who will take responsibility, right? So much of fathering is just about the example, right? What example am I giving my son for how he can be as a man? What example am I giving my daughter for what she should look for in the men in her life?
Hmm. And you've seen many people become fathers probably in this journey, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you see a difference between the men who are on a men's group being fathers and the ones without?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. A lot of the guys that have been in our community who this is actually a fun thing to reflect on, man. I wonder how many men have become fathers since who were not fathers when they started in Rising Man. Probably a lot. But I noticed, in the initial stages when a guy, when they first have a child, sometimes they disappear for a little bit, right? Especially those first few months when it's just really intense and nobody's sleeping and everyone's adjusting to having a new body in the house. But unequivocally so, man. First I'll speak for myself. There's no way I would be the kind of man and father and husband that I am without continuing to sustain my involvement and commitment to a men's team. I was on a men's team before I got married. I was on a men's team before I became a father, and I've always been on a men's team ever since. Um, the guys that I've seen who were on a team and then drifted away because not just because they became fathers, but life gets complicated, or a lot of times guys start to look for, well, what can I cut out? What's extra? And maybe the hook hasn't sunk in yet, right? And they go and they struggle out there in the world because that's what they think they need to do, is to cut out all the extra and go back to figuring out how to do it alone. And they go back to a survival pattern. A lot of guys suffer that way, and thankfully a lot of them come back and they say, man, I didn't know how badly I needed this, and I'm glad I can come back to it. That's why we don't ever close our doors on men unless there's a consistent and overt negligence of the core culture and agreements we have in Rising Man. The doors are always open for men to come back. We don't turn our backs on people. We don't. It's not a prideful thing that we're doing here. We recognize that sometimes people wander for a moment and need to find their way back. Um, but yeah, man. I mean, the ones who manage to have, because really what we're talking about when we talk about a team is a safe resource to go to where you can unravel. And when you get married and when you have kids, those are people in your life who are supremely dependent upon you. And so when you go through your emotions, which we all do, and you go through your fear and your doubt cycles and your insecurity cycles and your I don't know what to do cycles, you don't want to process that with your family first, because all that's going to do is drive up the fear and doubt scale in your partner and your kids. So it's okay to share hardship and difficult times with your family, but it's much different to do it coming from a grounded place where you've already processed through the emotions and found clear strategic direction to go forward with, than just to come home and say, oh my God, we're fucked. This is bad. It's so bad. I don't know what we're going to do. Honey, what are we going to do? Driving up everybody's fear and sending everybody's nervous systems into chaos.
Mm.
So even just that, even just having a place where you can go and just unravel, because the men on your team, as much as they love you, they're not emotionally dependent upon you,
Yeah.
right? You can go and you can just fall apart for a minute. And then after you're done falling apart, you're going to have a man looking you in the eyes saying, now what do you want to do? Right? Now what do you want to do about it? So
Hmm.
I think it's essential.
Yeah. And at the same time, it doesn't become easy. One of the deepest things that you told me in my fast was it's only gonna get harder. And I was like,
Not what
shit.
you wanted to hear, right? Not what you wanted to hear. Yeah, but I mean, when you think about it though, and I think even somebody who's never done any of this work before, how many things in your life that were easy do you remember fondly? The ones that I remember are all the difficult things, right? All the challenging things. And when you're going through them, it's easy to wish it away, right? You can go through a really hard workout, and in the middle of it, your brain is like, stop, stop, let this end, let it be over, quit, quit, quit. And then when you don't give up, somebody who runs a marathon, right? I mean, I don't know if there's anybody being honest with us that didn't have a voice in their head that says, stop, stop, don't keep going. Because in that same conversation in your head, you find another voice that says, no, no, it's okay. We can keep going. We can do more. And that's the most fulfilling thing. So when you talk to people about their greatest achievements, all of them have to do with overcoming something really difficult, right? So it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, dude, bad news. It's only going to get more difficult from this point out, and going through hard stuff is never going to be fun. But on the other side of it, that's what makes us feel really proud of our accomplishments. That's what allows the people who are watching us to become inspired to follow in the footsteps and then carve their own path through difficulty and adversity. Because that's what we're here to do, man. We're not here to live easily. In fact, living easily is what's corrupting so much of humanity. Netflix, Uber Eats, social media, that stuff's all easy. You don't have to have half a brain to do any of that stuff to live that way, right? In fact, even more than brains, you don't even have to have a heart to do any of that. You don't have to have courage or grit to order some Uber Eats and watch Netflix tonight. That's fine. It's okay. Enjoy your comforts, right? But know that a comfortable life is going to kill you, and a courageous life is going to build you.
What do you have expectations for your kid around taking the legacy of Rising Man?
This one I can say absolutely not. Um, I don't have any expectations of my son to do that. Because and because I don't think any one man should have to hold so much of it. And that's what I've learned in the first 8 years of Rising Man is I put so much of it on my own shoulders. And yes, I've had so many wonderful men along the way who have helped hold it up. It hasn't been just me, but I was still holding far more than one man should. And thankfully now we're moving away from that, and it feels so much better. So I don't put it on any one person, and certainly not my son, because I want him and my daughter, I want them to decide what their own legacy is in this world. But I will say that, man, it must have been like a couple years ago. I I'd never asked my son what he wanted to be when he grew up, right? I just never, that's kind of like the classic kids question. Well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember it just dawned on me, like, I never asked him that. So I did one day. I think we were driving in the car somewhere, and I said, hey, Sika, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember looking in the rearview mirror, and I see his face looking really confused, like, what are you asking me? I was like, well, no, what do you want to do? When you get older, when you're like, when you're as old as dad, what do you want to do? And he's looking at me confused. And I thought maybe it wasn't like he didn't understand the question. And then he says to me, he goes, what are you talking about, Dad? I'm gonna run the Rising Man. And I was like almost like that was his destiny. It had already been decided that that's what he was gonna do. And I was like, oh, buddy, like, wow, that. And I told him, I said, wow, that really means a lot. And I want you to know that if that's what you want to do, then so be it. And I'll support you every step of the way. But I don't know if that's his destiny or not. But I do trust that there's a lot of men, not just my son, but many men who are going to carry on this legacy long after I'm gone, and especially probably in the very near future when it's not going to be me steering the ship, and other men are going to step up, and I'm excited for that. Like I'm genuinely excited for that. I feel like any part of me, any selfish or immature part of me that held on to the identity of being the guy doing the Rising Man, that's long gone. I will be so happy when more qualified, more intelligent, more capable people step forward to carry this on. and I can just sit back and be an old guy sitting on the sidelines watching it thrive, you know? And so we'll see what happens, man. The future will tell us.
Yes. So putting it more into practical, what is happening for Rising Man in the coming future? It's become a nonprofit. What else is brewing there?
Well, certainly when this recording comes out, that'll be finalized. It's effective tomorrow, like literally like in about 12 hours. Rising Man will be an official nonprofit organization in the state of Texas, 501c3. It will be the property of the people,
Mm,
which even just saying that out loud delights me.
mm,
I am still the captain of the ship. I'm the executive director, but like I said, I have a team of directors, board of directors in front of me who are wonderful and believe in the same thing that we all believe in, but they're my bosses essentially now. So I am a loyal servant to the Rising Man movement. What's happening in the future is we're going to be rolling out opportunities from people outside of Rising Man. So people who are not active members or participants in Rising Man, but they want to see a world of better men in leadership positions, men, better fathers, better husbands, men who are really empowered to make a difference in this world. They can contribute to it with charitable donations, with volunteer opportunities, networking. So it's really exciting to me because up to this point, it's really been something. Rising Man has been sustained by the men who are actively involved in it, and that's going to continue. That's going to continue and grow and expand and evolve. But now we have so many opportunities to collaborate, not just with men inside the community, but men, women, corporations, federal agencies and grants that want to. And men's mental health is such a big challenge in the world today. So I'm just really excited because I feel like I don't even know what opportunities for collaboration are out there. But I believe that once people really hear the sincerity of our mission, that they're going to be behind what we're doing. So lots of collaboration, lots of evolution. I see my own role as an advocate and evangelist to Rising Man, really having to expand, and I'm ready for that. I'm excited for it because I know that there's men like yourself and so many others who are in leadership positions who are ready to fill in the ranks that I've been doing myself for so many years, and this really feels like it's the time. So yeah, man, so much more to come. I can't predict the future, but I see good things.
mm, awesome. And for where can people find more about Rising Man movement?
Yeah,
What's the best way to contact?
risingman.org is the best place to go see what we're doing on our website. Rising Man Movement on Instagram. We're gonna be doing a lot of updates to our branding and our story now that we'll be officially a nonprofit in the next 24 hours. So in the next, I'd say 2 to 3 months, really look out for us. We want to share the story because we feel like this is really our introduction to the public. I know a lot of people are aware of what we've been doing, but there's a much bigger megaphone that we want to announce our message and our mission to. So I would say just to be vigilant on the website and to check out what we're doing on Instagram and the socials, because that's where we're going to be announcing everything.
Mm-hmm. If you were able to say one more thing to a man that's listening to this, who's probably on the fence, who's not in men's group, what would you say to him?
Yeah. Uh, I mean, the first thing I always like to say to every man, I get to talk to a lot of guys, and we usually do Zoom calls, and I get to look them in the eyes. And at some point, I do my best to let them know, hey, you're not alone. Whatever story you have about yourself, whatever challenges that you're going through, I've heard it a million times over, and I've probably been through all of them myself. The first thing that men need to know is that they're not the only ones going through the challenges that they're going through. They're not the only ones who are afraid, who feel doubtful, who don't know what to do. And once you recognize that and really feel that in solidarity with other men, and you recognize, oh, I'm among other men, I'm among my brothers now, I'm among other men who are going through the same things that I am, then that's when you find your home. And that's when you can really begin to change everything and not to have to do it all by yourself. So those two simple things, you're not unique. You're not the only one going through what you're going through, and you don't have to go through it alone. We're here. There's so many wonderful men from so many different backgrounds. We have such a vast network of men with various skill sets that there's really no excuse for any man to be struggling in silence anymore.
And if today was your last day of running Rising Man, what would you say to the men in Rising Man? A message of love.
So last day. This is the last thing I get to say. Am I like, is this on my like my death? Like I'm on William Wallace on the battlefield. This is my last
Yeah.
message to the men. Oh, okay. Let me think about that one for a second. What would I say? Hmm. I would tell men to carry on the legacy for our children and to lift them up on our shoulders because they're the future. Give them everything that you've got, everything that you've got. Pour every last ounce of blood, sweat, tears, energy that you can into lifting up the children and letting them be better than we ever could be.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Awesome, brother.
That's it. Yo, and then I take my last breath on the battlefield.
Man, thank you so much for your time. It was a powerful conversation. And yeah, excited of Rising Man. Excited for you and excited for all the men who this will support in the future.
Likewise, thank you, Astro. And man, what an honor it's been to witness your evolution and your journey. And I'm just so excited for you and what you're creating in your life and in your world. One of many stories that I get to witness and celebrate along the way. And thank you for taking the time to help me share the story. And this is always the easiest thing for me is when someone says, "Hey, just show up and talk." Awesome. I love that. I do so much other thinking. This is the best for me. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share with your community what we're up to.
We start with the podcast and we have the checkpoint with the podcast, bro.
There we go. That's right. Look at that, man. Full circle.
Full circle moment, man.
Full circle.
Awesome, man. Talk to you soon.
Yes, sir.